Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. I'm Patrick Devaney, and I'll be hosting our episode today. We're joining you from the Jersey Shore, Asbury Park, where we are attending the ClassLink Seaside Celebration. Our topic today is advocating for new EdTech solutions. And I've got three very articulate and talented guests. I'm going to start on this end over here with Doug Roberts. He is the CEO of the Institute for Education Innovation. Here we have Kimberly Harrington Marcus. She is the CEO of Education Advisors. And finally, we have Jim McVetti, the managing partner of First Step Advisors. I'd like to start by asking each of you to give a few thoughts on your perspective on the topic for today. And I guess we'll start on your side, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Thanks to ClassLink also for hosting this Seaside celebration. This is its second year, is my understanding, and having been here for the inaugural, I'm very excited to be back. So thank you for having me and for having us on this podcast. Perspectives is a good word when you think about what we're going to be covering over the next 30 minutes or so. And there's so many perspectives to consider when you think about engaging in the K-12 market. First off, it's vast and it's vastly complex. So as you try and get a lens into the market, it can be difficult to figure out where your position is going to be. Are you a services business, software? Are you in curriculum and content? Each of those will reveal a series of complexities that does require perspective. It really requires you to understand what are you exceptionally good at and where are you going to be positioned. So I'm excited to unpack this a little bit and talk about where companies can find their footing in this space.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Kimberly?
Thanks for having me here, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my second year as well. And a special thank you to ClassLink for having us back. When I think of perspective, I think from the educator lens and standpoint, and I think of the perspectives of all the different stakeholders that come into play when making decisions about innovations in a school district. And many times I think our companies are thinking about those ed leaders and those who are decision makers. But I think it's really important when thinking about your product and your why, thinking about who the ultimate user and who's being serviced by the product. And so I'm specifically thinking about the importance of student perspective and inside lenses, as well as potentially parents, teachers, and leaders. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and thinking about how these innovations affect so many different users.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Doug, your thoughts?
Yeah, Pat literally grabbed me off the beach, as you can see. So, but glad to be here chatting with you all and you all as well. I think the theme of the last few years in our industry, both on the district leader side and on the industry side, has been twofold: empathy and humility. I think a lot of our district leaders in our community thought they had, I don't want to say that they thought they had a lot of things figured out, but things were going kind of well in a district, strategic plan, goals were being met. And then this pandemic comes and throws everybody off kilter, and you have to really quickly, you saw district innovators acting very entrepreneurially to kind of whack-a-mole and solve problems they never thought they'd have to solve, like contact tracing. No one knew what that was, and then they're doing it and leading it. And I think that what you're seeing on the industry side is a reaction to build more empathetic solutions, and I think that that's a really great trend. And I think when EdTech as we know it, I sort of chart it to like the late 90s, 2000s when SaaS software came out, there was a sort of a charge to the solution. I've got the widget, I know how to solve your problems. And I think now what we're seeing is more of a kind of, I think this might be helpful, what do you think approach? And I think the companies that take that approach are having the strongest success.
You know, Doug, it's interesting you say that because I'm thinking about some of the early stage companies that we work with, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. But when I think of those companies, they didn't have the solution and then go find the problem. I think in each instance of just a collection of companies that Doug and I partner with, they recognized a big issue, a big gap, a need to be addressed. And then I think they discerned yeah, I can solve for that. So that's what I'm going to walk towards. So I like your positioning there, because you're right. Too often we see folks have an idea that says, I'm going to make this and I'm going to make people love it. And what we're seeing, though, is people saying, gosh, there's lots of needs out here. I wonder if I can be a part of the solution. It's important.
So that's interesting, because when you think of entrepreneurs, you think of entrepreneurs entering a space and creating new solutions. Are the most successful entrepreneurs those that are best able to advocate a new solution, a new way of doing things, or those that just find a new answer to a well-known problem, and one that everybody is trying to solve?
I personally would say that it's yes and, because I think that's part of being an entrepreneur and an innovator, is always looking at multiple angles. And I think for me, as an education leader leading during the pandemic, one of the greatest things that I saw as an outcome is that we were running in parallel lines, education leaders and solution providers, and we were innovating both during the pandemic faster than ever before, as Doug shared. And I think we began to see silos and barriers break down during that time period, where we saw ourselves coming together as partners. And as Jim was saying, I think that that's really a key aspect of innovation as well, is knowing that there's a partnership, and to know maybe where asking a practitioner or someone who might be an end user for input can actually help you move faster than coming out with something only to find out, oh, if only it could do this, then I could move in this new direction faster. So for me, it was a really exciting time to be able to come together and feel like we were truly in partnership trying to find solutions for students.
You know, the origin story is pretty interesting. And Doug, at IEI, one of the things you have each of the companies do is talk about their solution, but you encourage them to talk about their origin story. And I think that's pretty compelling. One of the companies we work with is a group called Go Together, and their origin story is really interesting. So this is a small company focused on solving the big issue of transportation in education. So there's a shortage of bus drivers across the country, and there's a graying of the workforce. And this transportation issue is massive and it's complex. The origin story for Go Together is the founder, Kimberly Moore, was with her sister and her sister's family as they were struggling with access to school. They just couldn't get to school. And Kimberly's sister turned to her and said to Kimberly, you know what? You're a veteran of large brands and logistics. I bet you could solve for this. And challenged her to go and say, solve for this. And lo and behold, she's developed an early stage solution that is getting traction. And I just think the origin is really important. And that's what I think, akin to what you're talking about, Kimberly, is, you know, what's your purpose and why are you here? I think that's a really interesting piece of what we're talking about today.
How many companies are doing what they set out to do to begin with? Almost all of them, I would imagine, they've pivoted at some point, right?
I mean, ClassLink is a great example, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to be able to pivot, which Bears and you all have done. And I think that the more kind of mutual understanding there is about how similar the work is of leading a district and leading an any stage, but especially a nascent, K-12 organization, the better we will do as a ecosystem for students.
I think often, sometimes too, knowing the origin story or the why for an education leader is really a genuine way to connect and to build that relationship, which I think ultimately builds trust and in the end shortens the sales cycle, because there is a commonality around the why and how a company came to be and what they truly stand behind as their guiding light.
Well, I mean, ultimately, people buy from people. So if there's a connection, then that's a fast path to making a connection, right? So I think for a second. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the marketplace. Let's talk about some of the challenges. You know, when you've got a great new idea, you've got people that are interested in it. What are the first steps, and what are the challenges that you start to encounter when you branch out? Maybe we can start with you, Doug.
Yeah, access. It's the biggest challenge that K-12 companies experience. We were talking before we started about how you have to kind of explain to folks starting companies that districts do business in a in a public way, a public facing way. So the public has to be able to see all the dollars that are getting spent. Never forget when I sat in a session once at one of the big education conferences, and they were like, just skip the RFPs. You don't need them. That's why districts are bad, because they do RFPs. It's like, this is public money. Like, you have to see where the money goes. That's just part of it. So if you're not willing to work that process, you should find another industry to work in. But it's getting access to the people who make the decisions. And, we have a chicken egg problem. Our district leaders are overwhelmed with information and work and new challenges, and not to mention all the political stuff that's happening at some of their board meetings. So they're not going to read your email, right? So how do you get access is the question. And I think we should try to normalize on the district side. We've got to do a better job of, and I'm talking maybe to board members right now, normalize the idea of your superintendent being an ad hoc, maybe free advisor in exchange for some sort of discount for the district to a company. Don't think of that as being a bad thing. If your superintendent's chosen to sit and provide a few hours a year of advice to a company trying to start something, that's a really good thing. And it's going to help your district get better solutions and hopefully at a better price point. And then we have to try to find more opportunities to help our companies understand the importance of building those relationships. You can't just make a widget and tweet and send email campaigns, but you got to do the work. And to our entrepreneurs out there, be very wary of any investor or VC or anybody who says to you, oh, I think the best thing to do is to go sell to the top 250 school districts in the country, because those are going to be your best business. That was a strategy that has failed for many, many ed tech companies. The way to do this is to go find a place where you think you got some relationships, you got some connections, and go work with the 1,500 student district or the 4,000 student district or whatever it is that'll work with you, and build your sort of network effect, your land and expand. And then, Jim referenced it before, but we work in this incubator called Spark, and we're trying to kind of give the kind of access that IEI or ERDI or these other great organizations give to companies, for a sponsorship fee. We're trying to make that available to companies that are at the early stage who are not yet able to afford that from a cash perspective, and go look for those opportunities. But also, one more thing I want to say, beware of the incubator that wants to give you advice, a loan or office space, or, all the access to investors. That's all good, and you can go find that. But an incubator needs to help you grow your business, which means you got to build relationships with the people who run schools and districts.
It's funny how incubators hung their hat on giving you office space.
Right.
It just doesn't matter anymore.
Current entrepreneurs like, what's that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All the early stage are like, what do you mean?
You gonna give me my
basement? That's exactly right. But access is really probably one of the biggest challenges for early stage companies. They might have sized up a situation, like we talked about with Go Together. There's another company we work with at Spark called Teamology. This founder who was basically sizing up the SEL, the social emotional learning landscape, particularly for the little ones, the wee ones, and just found a lot of content, but not a lot of context and meaningful connections. And she said, I think there's a space here that I can fill. And she filled that space with a brilliant set of products. Her challenge has been, like many startups, is, okay, I have this amazing set of ideas. I've got these MVPs, these minimum viable products. Who do I tell and where do I tell? So one of the things that ERDI does, like you said, and IEI, is you create the watering holes where everyone starts to gather and share ideas and learn from each other. It is the biggest challenge for early stage companies, is that point of access. Among a slew of challenges, not the least of which is working within a technology ecosystem. But yeah, there's a lot out there. I don't know, Kimberly, if you want to.
I would just add, just as far as, I'm going to keep coming back to the theme, which is innovation, because I think you have to be innovative in all approaches, including how you gain access. And so often we go for the obvious, which is to reach out to the leaders or the top. And many times you might have a teacher or someone who's using the product. I know as an ed leader, that was something with one of the companies that I wound up bringing into my district, was that I found out through that company that I had 5 teachers who were using it on their own. And I was able to go to my teachers and ask them what they liked about it and how it was working for them. So that was a door and a way in that maybe hadn't been thought about. And I think the other space is, again, as Doug had shared, thinking creatively about partnerships, having an ed leader who's going to potentially try and use your product or your service and give you some good feedback or advisement on it. Again, that's creating a relationship and an open door that potentially leads to greater things, as well as for that person to introduce you to other people in their education circles, both within their state and outside. And I think the last place I would say to be really innovative and creative in terms of thinking about partnerships and networking is with other companies, because there's plenty of work and there's many students to be served. And so when we think about learning from one another or making connections, you never know when somebody else is going to have an opportunity and say, you know what, I'm not the best fit, but I know somebody else who could maybe help you out and I'd love to introduce you. So, don't close off your doors or be narrow-minded that maybe the ed leader is your only entrance point, but really to think innovatively in terms of those many different access points.
One of the companies that I think demonstrated innovation is ClassLink, hosting this podcast. And, we're here as a result of ClassLink having been in the market for 20 years. We now get to enjoy, to let our hair down, at least some of us, relax a little bit.
For yourself.
We get to relax in our, shorts and our sneaks. But what's interesting about ClassLink having achieved this position is you've created a center of gravity through your single sign-on, your rostering, your interoperability work. You have something like 500 integrations within your ecosystem. I have to bet more than a handful of those are early stage companies who came to you saying, I don't even know where to start with this. I got, pitched by Power School to pay them big fees. I've got other SSO and rostering companies who have a wonky business model. I'd be curious, we talked about access and relationships. I'd be curious, Patrick, to hear your perspective on the technical side of the equation, because it's a big factor for early stage companies.
Yeah, well, so I thought I was supposed to host this, but you're asking me the question. That's okay. I think the way I often talk about interoperability, because interoperability is a core portion of technology and education. It's required for so many of the functions that make the technology available. So the challenge is, when do you actually spend money on it? When do you plan for it? When do you decide how it's going to impact what you're doing? And I use the expression very often with early stage companies that you always have to have a plan for interoperability. You always have to know how you're going to fit in, where you're going to be able to leverage this to your benefit and enhance the product. But you don't want to spend the money on that until it's time to spend the money on that. When you get to growth and you have to be able to onboard more customers faster, when you have you get to a large enough number of customers that signing on and problems with signing on aren't an issue or a bigger issue. So I think it has to go very early into your planning, and then a big part of that decision is, when do you actually act on it? When do you spend money on it? One of the things that was interesting about the conversation so far about finding teachers that are using technology, there also are downsides to some of this with data privacy and security exposures that the district is responsible for, and teachers acting on their own may be providing risk or opening the door to some risk factors that nobody is aware of. And yet, how do you allow them to explore new solutions and minimize those challenges?
Yeah, it's a sticky wicket, because you want to encourage utilization and adoption by teachers, but from the district lens, while that's can be validating for you as a district leader to say, okay, I've got a bunch of teachers using this, I should look into it. At the same time, you might have teachers who unintentionally went rogue on data privacy, data security, student information. That's a tough one. How have you had to grapple with that?
So, we always vet our teachers and what they're using. But again, there are always teachers who have gone rogue or are trying something innovative. And so as an ed leader, certainly trying to approach that from the standpoint of a teacher wanting what's best for their students. And that's the intention behind the choice, and then really digging in to find out more, and then to be able to take that product and to say, we have a process for adopting on a larger scale and bringing that forward to a committee and letting that teacher become an advocate. And I think, again, that includes helps with partnerships and bringing others in. But definitely it's something that can be tricky, and especially in much larger districts where it's harder to keep a handle, I think, on that potentially.
So there's an expression around entrepreneurship, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. And successful entrepreneurs are not those that are willing to take risks that others don't want to take. A successful entrepreneur is able to understand how big that risk really is. And I think what you're describing is there's some management of risk through experimenting and adoption and trying new things that's necessary, but you have to manage to the potential downside of that. And I suspect there's also, and Doug, I would direct this question to you as a start. I love the idea of educators getting involved and giving back and contributing to the design and development of new solutions. I think there's also places where policies and regulations kind of seem at odds with that approach. Do you see that? And do you have any thoughts on
talking about procurement stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, I think you have to. District governance requires discipline around procurement and around how dollars are spent. But for any entrepreneurs listening to this, every district has a number, a threshold, right, over which you require bidding process, RFP, et cetera, and under which there does not need to be anything but a board vote at a meeting. And often those are just sort of part of a big packet of vouchers that are getting approved. So an innovative district leader can simply say, let's try something out and be ready to be flexible in your pricing. I can't tell many companies over the years, well, it costs this. Right, but their number is $5,000, so charge them $4,750. No, but it costs this. No, it costs $4,750. So that be willing to be flexible on that to get in the door. Getting in the door is gold in this business, and it's the hardest thing. And if you get in the door and you have a district that has success, and you got everybody from parents and kids to teachers to principals on up the chain are going to say this has been successful for us. That's how to. It's not you're not beating a procurement policy. You're within policy, but you're getting yourself in the door despite that. That said, I think there's room for reform. We've been talking amongst the IEI soups about can we go back and suggest reforms around how we engage with some of these companies? And it comes down to a lot of them are feeling some competitive pressure. Teachers are now, first of all, there are very few people in today's economy who work at the same place for 30 years. You get the watch when you retire, right? That doesn't exist anywhere except in our schools where the comp and all that is set up where you get paid more for each year you stay. You get your health insurance and pension and all that stuff if you stay for 30 years. So a lot of our members are feeling pressure because there are a lot of places you can teach now. You can teach in your kitchen while your kid's napping or while your kid's at school until you got to go run them to activities. So you could do the thing that you love from anywhere and not have to be on site in a school where you can only go to the bathroom during period breaks, right? And that's that competitive pressure. Our folks are thinking through, so should we be offering opportunities for our teachers to do entrepreneurial stuff while also keeping the talent here in the school? Or should we rethink how we structure some of our classes? And that's going to be a challenge. And we're just at the beginning of that.
I love that notion among your superintendents who are willing to think about teacher retention in maybe a different way, a way that I hadn't really considered, which is rather than try and, in addition to trying to be competitive on salary and other conditions of care, maybe we could just lighten up a little bit and let them do their thing in a way that they want to do their thing, because that is true. I know in my own hiring practices, I have a set of guidelines for, a role that I need, but also I'm willing to be flexible on that. If a person comes in, by the way, we hire a lot of former teachers, they're looking for that flexibility. They're looking for that thing to do that's theirs, even if they're fulfilling a role. I just find that really interesting and relevant in today's economy.
We're worried about the privatization of public schools becoming a thing. And in some political climates, that's actually something that electeds are pushing for, either implicitly or explicitly. And we're trying to think through how to start to affect a little bit of change. You got to remember, though, a lot of this is collectively bargained labor agreements about how many hours we're to be at school, et cetera. It's a big lift.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked a lot about challenges and lots of things that are in the way. Let's talk a little bit about success stories and people, organizations that have either made a very solid rise or they have overcome a challenge very effectively to bring their product to market and get it adopted.
Well, we're sitting under the banner of a good example of a company that has emerged as the leader in its space. But I think, as you alluded to before, Doug, they didn't hit a home run at their first swing, their second or third. I think Berge is the CEO and founder of ClassLink, and he would tell you that it took a lot of at-bats to get where they needed to be. And their pivot didn't happen in year one or year two. It happened actually after many years, but to their credit, and as we often see with entrepreneurs, they were committed and they were passionate about doing right by students and teachers and the communities they serve. So I think that's a good example of a company that has done it right. And I would introduce a thread here that ClassLink emulates, but that we see in Go Together, in Teamology, another company that we work with called Core Insights. They're like ClassLink, they're all students of the market. So they're all, willing to learn and change their thinking and change their perspective based on conversations with people like Kimberly, conversations with people like the IEI superintendents. So I think being a student of the market is a big takeaway from some of the successes that we've seen.
And I would piggyback off of that because another success story that I'm thinking about is Gaggle and Jeff Patterson, the CEO. And the very nature or the story that I was going to share is, first of all, being clear about the origin and his why that he was so passionate about starting this company. But he will share the story of years ago when he came before a group of educators with what at that time was his baby to share this new product and his excitement, only for them to have them say, you cannot take this out to market right now. It's not ready. And having to go back and spend some quiet time reflecting and licking his wounds a little bit, but to really hear and to be responsive and to be a product of the, thinking through the market space and really taking that feedback to heart, and now has an incredible company providing safety and security to a lot of the students in our district. So I think that's a really great point that you shared.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say too, for those keeping score, Gaggle, a bootstrapped, self-funded by Jeff company, it is possible. They're a hugely influential company. ClassLink, Berge largely put all that together, many years of toil in the trenches with the company, and now having great impact. So there are many paths. These are two great paths that didn't go the venture capital route, but many do. And I think, when you go to like a VC conference or an investor focused conference, the success stories they're going to talk about are around multiples. This company exited for blah, 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 right? And that's great. And we should celebrate those, I think. So we talk about success in terms of multiples. And when you go to investor conferences, that's largely the metric that's used. But we should also celebrate the companies who either bootstrap or who exit for 4X or 5X because they're working with 100 districts around the country and they're making something happen. I like to talk about my friends Miriam and Alex, the founders of Kinvolved, who just sold to Power School. And, it was not the 100X thing that maybe they wanted when they started it. And I was an advisor to them early, full disclosure, but they made an impact in increasing family engagement between districts and the families that they serve. And now they're going to continue to have that impact as part of the Power School portfolio. Those kinds of successes where former teachers start companies, have impact, have some sort of exit, but continue to do their work are really great stories. And frankly, EdTech founders, most of the exits that happen here are like that. So if you want the 200X, this may not, that's not super likely.
Maybe it'll do for you. It's a get rich slow industry for sure.
Well, I would add a couple of thoughts. As ClassLink was mentioned here, I think one thing to point out, not just to be a student of the market, but to engage the market in what you're doing. We have a large portion of our company at ClassLink came from the classroom, used our product in the classroom, has guided the development that we've done and continued to do. And the second comment that I would make is it's not a one and done. We are constantly looking at what that next innovation is, what that next turn is. And it becomes a little harder even because now you've got a legacy that you're managing and you're still trying to pivot and move forward with a much more progressive and forward movement.
Yeah, that's interesting, Patrick, because, we talk about entrepreneurs and they're working towards an exit or towards being evergreen. Gaggle and ClassLink are two examples of evergreen companies who are not pointed towards an exit, but there are others out there who did exactly that. I'm thinking of Aperture Education. Jessica, the CEO, did a really good job building up an SEL framework, and they just sold. And there's others out there like that who, have defined their success, like Doug said, not as a measure of multiples, but as a measure of impact. And their impact might be evergreen or it might be through an exit. Either way, totally valid.
Now we have a new crop of ESSER era companies, I'm going to call them, right?
Yeah,
and
great point.
We're about to separate the children from the adults, right? That's the non-gender way of saying what we used to say. We're just seeing the beginning of the ESSER era of companies in EdTech. And when those dollars, as you were referencing, Jamie, when those dollars start to fall away in the next couple of years, we're going to separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of those companies and which are built for the long haul and which were built to just capitalize on federal funding right now. And I wish everybody the best of luck, but I think we're going to learn a lot about this industry over the next couple of years.
Totally concur. Absolutely.
Agreed. And I think sustainability is the name of the game. So, when you're looking to use those dollars, really thinking about and being creative and innovative in the way that you're placing yourself to think about how you become sustainable and not dependent upon those particular dollars, as Doug was sharing. Great point.
Great. Well, and there's a world that we can talk about. We've got a lot of experience sitting here together, and I'm fascinated and certainly appreciative for you joining. I'm going to try to summarize a couple of the themes that came out of this, and I would welcome you to correct me when I get it wrong, because I probably will. One of the things that's very, very clear is that humans are still a big part of this equation, and finding connections are vital. Those connections can come in lots of ways, some that are expected, some that are unexpected. It might be your neighbor who has a cousin that works at the school district that has this problem exactly, and you can talk to them. I think innovation is not something that you can define. It's a willingness to try new things, take on new approaches, and in a lot of cases, I think we have to think big but act small in order to find little ways to wiggle in, little ways to validate what you have, and then push it forward. I think another comment here is that despite the fact that this is public funds, these are public funds and spending is done in public, there are ways still, there are avenues to get adoptions happening and explore the efficacy of new tools and the usability of new tools. And ultimately, I think it's got to be a collaborative effort between the companies and the educational institutions to find the right answers. It's not all the weight isn't on somebody, but rather it has to be done collaboratively, and it has to continuously be done. Did I miss anything?
You crushed it.
I crushed it. Great. That along with my hair, and I'm all set, right?
Total package.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. I certainly appreciate you taking the time and sharing your thoughts. We'd love to have you all back again. We'll find some new creative topics to talk about. And I want to thank you for joining us today. Welcome you to follow us on Spotify, Apple, any place you get your podcasts, and join us next time for Perspectives Finding Common Ground.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.